Okay, let's unpack this. You know that feeling.
Yeah.
You got an IT issue, something's not working, you log a ticket, and then, well, you wait
Uh-huh.
and wait, and maybe you end up chasing it. It's a classic frustration, right? For everyone involved.
Absolutely. And, on the flip side, for the IT teams trying to keep everything running smoothly, those delays aren't just frustrating, they can have real consequences.
Like what?
Well, they impact business operations, they can hit customer satisfaction pretty hard, and yeah, they definitely can chip away at the credibility of the IT service desk itself.
That's exactly the world we're diving into today. We've got a fascinating source document here. It's basically a project draft,
Hmm.
and it outlines a Six Sigma DMAIC initiative specifically designed to tackle this very problem in incident management, not resolving issues fast enough to meet those, all-important service level agreements or SLA.
Right, and the scenario presented in the source, it's a common one, really. An organization finds itself resolving only, 78% of incidents within their defined SLAs.
Only 78%, and their target.
Their target is significantly higher, 95%. So that's a pretty substantial gap they need to close.
It really is. And the goal they've set for themselves seems, well, pretty ambitious.
Yeah.
Jump from that 78% compliance all the way up to 95%.
Yeah.
And they want to do it in just 4 months. That's a really tight timeline for that kind of improvement.
It certainly highlights the urgency, doesn't it? And the need for a very structured approach. You definitely can't just wing it to achieve that kind of leap.
No way.
So they're applying a proven framework, Six Sigma's DMAIC methodology, define, measure, analyze, improve, control to systematically address the problem.
Exactly. So for you listening, we're going to walk through their plan step by step following those DMAIC phases. It's a great real-world example of how a data-driven, structured approach is used to get to the root of a very specific, measurable process problem and actually fix it.
Right.
Let's jump in, starting with define.
Okay, so the defined phase, it's the absolute foundation. It's where you get crystal clear on exactly what problem you're trying to solve, who your customers are in this process, and you sort of get a handle on what the current process looks like at a high level.
And the source document shows they've really nailed this down in a project charter. This thing is like the project's constitution, isn't it?
Pretty much, yeah.
It defines the project name SLA improvement for incident management. That really clear goal we mentioned, increase compliance from 78% to 95% in 4 months. The scope?
Right, the scope is key. They're focusing on the incident management process for P1 through P4 incidents, specifically those handled by the service desk.
Okay.
And importantly, the problem statement itself, that gap between the 78% actual and the 95% target, it's all laid out.
They also use visualization tools, right? Like a SIPOC diagram.
Yeah, SIPOC suppliers, inputs, process, outputs, customers. It just helps see the high-level flow and the key players involved. So you'd have a user as the supplier submitting an incident request, that's the input. It goes through the incident management process, resulting in a resolved incident. The output for the business user, who's the customer, it helps map out those interaction points pretty quickly.
It really helps you see the forest before you get lost in the trees, doesn't it?
Exactly.
And they identify the critical to quality requirements, the CTQs. These are the things that absolutely must go right from the customer's point of view.
Right. And for this project, the source says the CTQs are resolution within the SLA, time for all priorities. That's the big one.
Makes sense.
Also, proper ticket categorization and assignment right up front, and timely escalation if it can't be resolved quickly. These are basically the non-negotiables for success here.
Got it. Okay, so that's define. Next up is measure.
Moving into the measure phase, yeah. The objective here is all about gathering hard data to really understand the current state. You need to know your baseline performance quantitatively.
This is where they get really specific. The source confirms their baseline is that 78% SLA compliance overall. But the measurement phase is where you break it down, right?
Exactly, you dig deeper. They found P1 incidents, the highest priority breach, 15% of the time.
Right.
P2s breach 20% of the time. P3s are at 25%. And maybe surprisingly, the P4s, the lowest priority, are actually the worst offenders. They breach 35% of the time.
35% for P4s. That is surprising. Why would that be?
Yeah, that pay-for number often surprises people. But, lower priority incidents often have the highest breach rates in practice. There's less immediate pressure. Sometimes the procedures are less standardized.
Okay.
And they can just get left lingering in queues longer, so the rate of breach goes up.
That's fascinating. You'd instinctively think the P1s would be the hardest to hit because the clock is ticking so fast.
You would, but those other factors influence the breach rate lower down.
Yeah.
The measure phase also captures other things like average time to assign an incident.
And what was that?
In this case, a lengthy 2 hours. And the average time to resolve was 22 hours overall.
2 hours.
Yeah.
Just to get assigned. Wow. That feels like a huge clue right there, even before we get to analysis, just sitting there waiting.
Precisely. And this phase measure, it involves defining where that data comes from, usually the ITSM tool, like ServiceNow or maybe Remedy.
Sure.
And how it's going to be collected reliably. They often use a detailed process map, maybe a swim lane diagram, to visualize exactly where measurement points are needed in the process.
Okay, so we've defined the problem, we've measured the current state with hard data, all those percentages and times. Now we get to the heart of it.
Yeah.
Analyze.
Right.
What is actually causing these SLA breaches? What are the root causes?
This is the detective work part. You typically use tools like Pareto analysis, that 80-20 rule often applies, where, a few causes drive most of the problems, or fishbone diagrams, maybe the 5 whys technique to really drill down.
And the findings presented in the source here are really revealing, aren't they?
They really are. They found that a whopping 60% of their SLA breaches are due to misrouting or delayed assignment.
60%. Remember that 2-hour average assignment time we just talked about?
Exactly. This finding totally connects the dots.
Wow.
That delay in just getting the ticket to the right person, or sometimes any person, is the single biggest factor here.
Incredible. What else did they find?
Well, after that huge chunk, 25% of the breaches were attributed to a lack of skill in the first responder, meaning the initial analyst couldn't resolve it and had to escalate or hand it off, which just adds time.
Okay, 25%.
Then 10% were due to tool outages, the system being down when needed. And the final 5% was down to unclear incident descriptions coming from the user in the first place.
Wow. Okay, so if you just tackle that massive 60% caused by the routing and assignment issues, you've addressed the vast majority of the problem right there. That's a massive aha moment that only the data analysis can really give you, isn't it?
Absolutely. It tells you exactly where to focus your efforts for the biggest impact. You're not just guessing anymore.
Right. Which leads us neatly into the improve phase.
Exactly. Knowing those key root causes leads directly into improve. This is where you brainstorm, develop, and then implement solutions that specifically target those verified causes.
So based on that analysis, especially that huge 60%, finding the source lists, several potential solutions they considered.
Right.
To tackle the misrouting and delayed assignment, they propose implementing automated assignment rules.
Yeah, based on keywords or the incident category selected, that's a logical, direct attack on the biggest root cause we found.
Automating that initial step just bypasses the human delay potential.
Exactly. Yeah. They also suggest creating an SLA breach dashboard, something with real-time alerts, so teams and managers get notified immediately when a ticket is getting close to breaching, or actually breaches. Gives them visibility.
Proactive, I like it. What about the 25% skill gap issue?
For that, they suggested creating specialized Tier 1 groups for common, recurring incident types. So you get it to the right expert faster, hopefully resolving it at first contact.
Makes sense.
And also just providing more training for the frontline staff on proper incident classification and that initial routing piece. Getting it right the first time.
And what about escalations?
To make sure tickets that do need escalation move quickly, they talked about revising the escalation matrix itself.
Good.
Put in clear, time-bound triggers that force the ticket to move up the chain if it's stuck.
Right, build it into the process. The source even mentions they piloted some of these solutions.
Yeah, and saw some pretty promising early results. In the pilot groups, compliance apparently jumped to 92%.
Wow. From 78% baseline.
Well, in the pilot group, yeah. And the average assignment time dropped by 60%. That kind of immediate impact really helps validate that you're on the right track with your chosen solutions.
Definitely builds confidence. Okay, so define, measure, analyze, improve. That brings us to the final phase, control.
The final phase, control. And, this is one that's often overlooked or maybe not given enough attention. But it's absolutely critical for any kind of long-term success.
Why is that?
Well, you've found solutions, you've implemented them, you've seen improvements, but how do you make sure those gains actually stick? How do you prevent things from just sliding back to the old way over time?
Sustainability.
Right, exactly. This phase is all about sustaining that improved performance and preventing the process from backsliding. And the source outlines a pretty detailed control plan to do this.
It's in the plan?
It includes specific metrics they'll keep tracking, the targets for those metrics, how often they'll be monitored, and importantly, who owns them. Accountability.
Okay.
For instance, monitoring the overall SLA compliance rate weekly with that target of 95% or more owned by the incident manager.
Makes sense. Keep your eye on the prize.
Right. They also plan to monitor that average assignment time weekly, now aiming for less than 1 hour, a direct result of addressing that 60% root cause with automation.
Nice target.
And tracking escalation timeliness as well, making sure those triggers work.
So it's about ongoing measurement. What else?
This phase also involves updating the standard operating procedures, the SOPs, to reflect the new, improved process for routing, categorization, everything.
So everyone knows the new way.
Yes, and creating SOPs for using those new monitoring dashboards effectively. And they even mention using statistical control charts.
Oh, like X-bar, R charts, that sort of thing?
Exactly, X-bar, R, P charts, perhaps, to visually track performance over time and, crucially, spot if the process starts to drift out of acceptable limits before it results in a flood of new breaches. It's an early warning system.
That's smart. Very proactive.
And critically, they plan for ongoing sustainability measures beyond just monitoring. Things like quarterly refresher training for staff,
Keep skills sharp.
monthly governance reviews to look at the performance trends and discuss any issues, and even integrating these key performance indicators, the KPIs, into performance appraisals.
Ah, tying it to performance. That reinforces accountability for actually following the improved process, doesn't it?
It really does. It embeds it in the culture.
Okay, so zooming out and wrapping up this deep dive. We've essentially followed the journey outlined in this source document, using that DMAIC framework as our map for this incident management project. Starting from defining that clear, often frustrating problem of only 78% SLA compliance and then measuring the baseline properly.
Through analyzing the specific root causes with hard data, uncovering that really interesting insight about delayed assignment being responsible for that huge 60% chunk of the problem,
Right.
and then designing those targeted solutions like automated assignment and better training to address those specific causes.
And finally, maybe most importantly for the long run, setting up those robust controls to ensure those hard-won gains actually stick over time. Through that continuous monitoring, updated procedures, ongoing coaching training.
Yeah. This specific case study, with its really clear goal of jumping from 78% to 95% LA compliance in a short time frame, it vividly illustrates the power of a data-driven, step-by-step methodology like Six Sigma's DMAIC.
It really does.
It shows how it can reveal surprising insights, things you might never guess without digging into the analysis, and it provides a structured path to achieving genuinely measurable results.
It makes you realize, doesn't it, that while finding effective solutions is obviously key, the real long-term challenge, the thing that separates maybe temporary fixes from lasting improvements, it absolutely lies in that control phase.
I agree completely. How do you truly embed the changes? How do you constantly monitor performance effectively? And how do you build a system that prevents the process from slowly, maybe inevitably, slipping back to its old, less effective ways? That's the tough part.
It really is.
It raises a question, doesn't it? Thinking about a process you interact with regularly, maybe something at work or even, in your personal life, what do you think might be the single biggest underlying root cause of frustration that a structured look, just like this project took, might actually reveal if you dug into it with data?
Something to chew on, definitely. And that concludes this deep dive into improving incident management SLAs using the Six Sigma DMAIC framework.